Okay, today I want to talk about the Stoics. I've written ZENO of Citium at the top, but again there aren't any surviving works from ZENO. Most of these ideas I've taken from Diogenes Laertius, not the previous philosopher Diogenes of Sinope, but the guy who wrote a lot of different information about a lot of these old philosophers. But there is a lot of work from the Stoics. If anyone would like to read some, Epictetus has got a lot of great stuff about their ethics in his discourses, and as well as Seneca, who has some great stuff about anger, for example. He wrote a very good essay on anger and how to control, well, how you should control your anger and why you should control your anger. And Marcus Aurelius is also a Stoic, and he has a lot of really interesting phrases concerning, again, mostly their ethics, but also their physics. And this is what I wanted to start with. They divided philosophy into three different studies. The study of logic, which would include grammar. I'm not going to speak about it today because I'm pretty tired of always speaking about grammar. So logic is really a study of grammar, and the study of logic as it's known today would be included, as in what makes a logical statement true or false, this kind of thing. That was described as just the shell of philosophy. The white of philosophy, because this is obviously an egg analogy, it's the metaphor of an egg, and the white of philosophy, which is inside the shell, the white of the egg, was ethics, which we're going to discuss secondly today. And the reason is, I think if we look at physics first, which obviously deals with the cosmology, the shape and size of the universe and what kind of what is the universe made of, this was the yolk, the inner core, the nucleus of philosophy. So I'd like to start with the nucleus, because if we deal with physics, their ideas of their ethics will be a little bit clearer, I hope. So the physics of the Stoics, you can see influences of many of the philosophers we've already dealt with. You can see the influence of Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, Democritus, Empedocles as well. So all of these pre-Socratic philosophers appear really in the physics which they describe. They claim, the Stoics claim, that there are two universal substances. I should say now that there are at least 10 or 15 different people who are considered Stoics, so they may not all agree on the details, but this is in general what's associated with Stoic philosophy. So they believed in two universal substances which were inseparable. Now, one of these substances was active and the other one was passive. And really, you should understand this as one was dominant and one was dominated. One is a master and one is a slave. So this is what's associated with the active principle. And I want to make clear that these two principles also, these two substances, are inseparable. You cannot separate one from the other. Now, the passive stuff was matter. It was the four elements which we first encountered in Empedocles and which was developed by Democritus. These atoms, this matter, these four elements, it was considered passive. Okay, it was considered basically extended stuff, extension, solid stuff, or liquid or gas, but extension in space. The active substance was called the logos. Now, this is a little bit harder to define because I think we all have a pretty good understanding of what they meant by matter. But the active principle was divine reason. It was associated with the power of judgment. Not only in people, because this divine reason, it manifested itself in everything. And I think this is pretty similar to what Thales had in mind when he claimed that everything was alive in some sense. Well, everything was animated by the active principle of reason, and this was also associated with the will. It's called the principle of cohesion, but I think not only does it bring things together, it's also where things go when they fall apart, and so it's indestructible, it's eternal, this active principle. It's in all matter, it doesn't have a shape like matter does, it's formless, and it will always be there for all time. Perhaps it kind of gives shape to matter, and in that sense it's the principle of cohesion, but it's also the reason why it falls apart as well. Now, if we come on to a second point, which the Stoics believed, the Stoics also thought that the universe was a rational, living being. Now, this is the start of pantheism. A certain number of Stoics, especially Epictetus, they speak about God very often, and so they clearly believed in God, though it seems to be slightly different from Christianity, because for them, God was the universe. The universe was a rational, living being. It had reason, not just in its parts, but as a whole. And the logic of this, I mean, one of the arguments which I read in Diogenes was animals are better than non-animals, obviously, and nothing is better than the world, so the world must be an animal. And not only must it be an animal, but it must be rational, because being rational and being reasonable is considered divine. It's considered better than being just a dumb animal, and so the world is a rational, living being. And so this is perhaps one of the first times we meet pantheism. They not only believe that the universe is rational and alive, like Thales, they also believe in an endless chain of causation. And this kind of comes from their atomism, which starts with Democritus. They believe that fate is predetermined by the chain of causality. It is a soft determinism. I want to make that clear, that it's not hard determinism, because they still talk about free will, although it's unclear exactly to what extent they believed people were free or had free will, but certainly when we talk about distinguish between your reason and your judgment and external circumstances, they believe that you do have free will when it comes to your reason. And this is the way you react to external circumstances. You can react well to external circumstances or badly. And so in this sense you might say that they're not really determinists, because there's still some free will there. But they certainly believed in fate, that you had no control over external circumstances, and that has big big consequences for their ethical doctrines. Okay, so as well, they believed that there was a finite number of elements in the world. The void that we're surrounded by is infinite, even though the world isn't. The void that we're surrounded by is infinite, and therefore you're going to have an endless chain of causation. You're going to have an endless cycle. Time is going to keep going round and round in cycles, and the world itself will eventually die. The whole of it will go up in flames, but it will be born again, and then the cycle will be repeated. So they believed in this eternal repetition of fate, of what happens in life. And this was a consequence of their atomism and of their belief in causality. Remember that this belief system lasted for hundreds of years, just as long as many religions do, and so it was very enduring as a philosophy, as was the philosophy of Epicurus, which we'll look at next time. But they also had a very modern understanding of seasons, eclipses, the solar system. Even when they talk about lightning and they talk about clouds rubbing against each other, you can see how it's still similar to modern understanding of static electricity, coming from when two materials are rubbed against each other, and they certainly knew about that. I think even Thales was responsible for rubbing limestone and seeing that it attracted certain metals or bits of hair, for example. Anyway, very modern understanding of science. Onto their ethics now, which really comes from two main characters, Diogenes and Socrates. Concerning Diogenes, I would say there is a difference, and that's that the Stoics don't seem to be quite so antisocial. They certainly don't seem to be quite so shameless. Diogenes is famous for doing a lot of his bodily functions in public. I don't read about the Stoics doing the same thing. They seem to be too proud to do something like that. And so they are different from Diogenes, but nonetheless, if you read Epictetus, for example, he says a lot of really good things about Diogenes. He's very impressed by him, as are the other Stoics. So they like him. They like the way he argues and devalues things like rank and authority, but perhaps they don't agree with him concerning everything, because they certainly don't act like it. Now, I wanted to talk about Socrates. Socrates made 3 points when he came about. I'm not sure if it's Socrates or Socrates, so forgive me. He made 3 points. He said that we err unwillingly. Yeah, if we're not virtuous and we commit a sin or we act badly in some kind of way, this is always unwillingly. We are evil only through ignorance. Now, some of you may very well disagree with Socrates here. There's obviously a few problems with this kind of philosophy. For a start, nobody does evil for evil's sake. And you might disagree with that. Some people you might feel are evil because they enjoy it or take pleasure from it. Certainly Socrates disagrees. We are evil only through ignorance. We have to develop our reason to be virtuous. And the Stoics took this very much for themselves. They certainly agreed with Socrates here. They explained that virtue is a life in agreement with nature. Now, what does it mean to live in agreement with nature? Well, a man is naturally reasonable, logical, and the natural life of man is a life in accordance with reason and logic, is a life in agreement with nature. It's very different from other ethics, like Aristotle's ethics of the doctrine of the mean, or like Epicurus's ethics. In the next lesson we'll look at how he identifies pleasure as virtuous and pain as vicious, and so pleasure's good and pain is bad. It's very different philosophy. Okay, so a lot of consequences from this. Firstly, don't be angry with evil men. It's not their fault. They need to be taught. They need to develop their reason. And once they develop their reason, they will stop being evil. But you shouldn't let it concern yourself. It has nothing to do with you. What you should be doing is distinguishing between what is in your power, which is the way you react to external circumstances, the way your reason judges external circumstances, the judgments you make about what's going on in the world. That is in your power, and you can either make an incorrect judgment and become an evil man, or you can make a correct judgment and become a good man. So you've got to distinguish between what's in your power, reason, judgment, the will, the way you react to external circumstances, and what's not in your power, which is external circumstances. Okay, how rich you are, or even the family you have, or the house you have, or the rank you have, this is not in your power. These are all considered external circumstances, and you should forget about those. They're not your concern. Okay? So virtue is basically aligned with self-control, with reason, with indifference to circumstances, especially difficult circumstances. You're not supposed to get upset about them or become angry about them, because these are just emotional reactions, and it shows no self-control, no reason, no good judgment. And that's basically where their ethics, well, that sums up their ethics in a nutshell. Now, this brings me on to Christianity. They're kind of anticipating some of the early ideas of the Christians, who separated the world into body and soul, into these two different substances. They're kind of anticipating them with their separation of your reason, your judgment, your will. It's kind of like the soul, and your emotional reactions to external circumstances, which is kind of connected with the body. And so a lot of the early Christians, they liked Seneca, they liked a lot of these early Stoics. However, they did say some very strange things. Diogenes said this too, as did Plato. So a number of them have talked about a community of wives and children. I think even Epicurus perhaps speaks about it, but I'll let you know next week. But this idea that marriage was a dangerous institution, because it was the reason why people had emotional reactions of jealousy and this kind of thing. And so there should just be a sharing of wives, and the responsibility of bringing up children was the responsibility of everybody. It wasn't just your responsibility. So some pretty weird ideas there that you might not agree with. And of course, Diogenes even went further and seemed to be in favour of the abolition of private property. Everything belonged to everybody. And I'm not sure that that's such a wise idea. So, yeah, obviously there may not be... their ethics may sound very, very good, but there may be some weaknesses in there. Anyway, let me know what you think. Thanks very much for watching this lesson. If you have any questions, please put them under the video, and I look forward to hearing about your ideas concerning this. Thanks a lot.